The Tainted Personality of Joel by Ivan McWilliams. Chapter 2. Sick in the Street. It had been about 2 weeks since my trip to the police station, and guess what happened? It was the middle of November, and on top of having to deal with all the guilt from what I did, I came down with a freaking cold. I almost felt like my dad didn't even give a shit about my pain because every now and then, when he would bring me cold medicine, it's not like he was showing the usual affection that parents have. He would just bring me my fluids and my cough drops with the same heavily disappointed look on his face that he had during those 2 car rides. He hardly spoke to me, and when he needed to do so, he would just talk to me in very few, simple words. The previous week, I had to show up in juvenile court, and I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of glad that I would soon end up in a correctional facility. It was pretty boring at home anyway, since my dad, who once had a very delightful personality, now wasn't usually in the mood to speak to me. In fact, he of course confiscated most of my electronics in the court of the TV as a punishment. A few days ago, I called Eugene on the phone, and I knew he probably didn't want to talk to me since he found out that I was the one who pulled a knife on his mom, but surprisingly, he was pretty welcoming when we were talking on the phone. I guess that he saw what I did to her as some justice I gave him for the traumatic punishment he received. He told me that his mom couldn't take all the stress she was going through anymore, especially since she was very shocked that he threatened to stab that kid at school. To cope with it, she decided to send Eugene to live with his grandparents, and the new school he would have to be enrolled in would be local to his grandparents' house. He also told me that living with them was hell because they were very strict and they forced him to do a bunch of chores around the clock. He said that he and his younger brother Joshua were planning on running away soon, and he asked me if I wanted to run away with them. I knew that joining them would be a terrible idea, but if I were to do so, I would be able to evade juvenile detention, and I knew that he would probably want a really good friend by his side since he would constantly be at a high level of stress from being homeless and having to evade cops. Something I really dreaded about doing this was the fact that it would be pretty inconvenient to be on the run with a moderate cold, and I would have to find a way to get a ride to Eugene's house. Several days later, I made up my mind and confirmed that I would run away. This was the night before my dad would have to drive me to juvie, and something pretty insensitive he told me was, "Son, I know that parents usually love their children no matter what, but I hate what you did so much that I don't feel those feelings anymore, and I can't wait till tomorrow when I drive you to juvie and your ass just disappears from my life." Anyway, the only form of money I had access to was cash, so calling Lyft wasn't even an option. So I would have to do the grueling task of getting to Eugene's house on foot. The average time it would take to drive there was half an hour, but on foot it would probably take about 5 hours. However, I knew I had no time to waste, so I started throwing some of my stuff into this black bag. I packed a toothbrush, some clean clothes, my wallet, and some other essential items. In the living room, I overheard him on the phone with the correctional facility he was supposed to drive me to, so I crept into my bedroom and took some cash from his wallet. I knew I wouldn't have to worry about getting in trouble for stealing from him since I was going to be on the run anyway. To make sure to stave off getting caught running away for as long as possible, I waited for my dad to go to bed before I left the house. I called Eugene on the phone and explained to him the fact that I was going to get to his new house on foot. He was of course kind of shocked, but then I reassured him and made him understand that there was no way to get a ride to his place. As I waited for my dad to go to sleep, I watched YouTube on my phone, in my room. At around midnight, I noticed that he finally turned out the lights, but I decided to wait a little bit longer to make sure he was asleep. At about 12:30, I slung my bag over my shoulder, and then opened the front door and walked out of the apartment. I knew it was risky and stupid to be wandering around in the middle of the night, but for some reason, Eugene told me that he was running away at the last minute, and this was my only chance to run away with him since my dad would have to take me to juvie tomorrow. As I walked, I made sure the hood of my sweater was covering most of my face so I could hide it. I began to feel pissed at myself they just did this shit to him, which was running away when he had been treating me so well. In my head I complained to myself, "What has he ever done to you?" For the next couple hours I continued walking, feeling lost and guilty because I even felt like I betrayed my own father. I managed to stumble upon a park, and I was so tired that I decided to enter it, and then drop to the grass to try to get some rest. I used my black bag as a pillow. I was in so much despair that I almost didn't mind the fact that I could very easily get caught. I was hiding behind a bush, lying down sideways in the grass. I knew I would feel very screwed since my dad would be scared to death and call me on the phone, so I decided to make sure he couldn't reach me by blocking him. I was already in deep shit, so I fell asleep in no time. A few hours later, though, a cop's voice broke into my dreams. I rolled onto my other side to face him and was still lying down. I had the hood of my sweater hiding my face, so I hoped it would be a little bit harder for him to tell I was a minor. He asked me, "Are you okay, sir?" I tried to speak, but I already had a cold, and wandering in the freezing weather really screwed up my vocal cords. I whispered, "I'm okay, sir." He asked me for my name, and the fake name I gave him was Jacob Black. Then he asked, "Why are you sleeping here?" "Because I lost my job, and now I'm homeless." Then he said, "Well, it's suspicious that you're sleeping in this really discreet area, especially since several officers around the city have received a report about a kid who tried to stab a woman in her sleep. And I can't help but notice that you look kind of similar to his description. Do you mind lifting your hood so I can get a better idea of what you look like?" My stomach dropped. I had to think quickly. I whispered, "1 second, I need to cough." I purposely started coughing up some nasty stuff that was a result of my cold, and the cop's attention wavered. I was somehow able to ignore my fatigue, and while he was looking away, I dragged myself to my feet really quickly and started sprinting down the road. He screamed, "Hey!" as I zipped forward. He started chasing me, but I got really lucky and managed to lose him. To make sure I didn't get caught, I kept sprinting until I was completely out of breath. My lungs couldn't take it, so I noisily coughed again and spat it all out on the concrete. As a result of my exhaustion and the fact that I was drowning in my own illness, I ended up getting hit with a wave of sudden confusion, and then my vision went extremely dark. A few seconds later, I suddenly blacked out. In the morning, I woke up in a field of grass. I somehow managed to black out in the middle of another park. I remained laying there for a couple minutes, and then realized I was thirsty as hell. I unzipped my bag and got out my bottle, and then chugged some water, and even forgot that I would have to drink it sparingly. I just laid there for a few more minutes, staring at the sky and trying to think. Then I stood up and headed towards the road. I looked at the GPS on my phone, and it looked like it would be about 2 more hours before my monotonous walk to Eugene's house was accomplished. Since I had no food and hardly any water, I felt like I was putting myself through so much shit doing all this walking. I knew I had the option of stopping at the nearby restaurants, but I was trying to conserve my cash. However, I think I kind of deserved to go on this very tedious walk for betraying my own father. It seemed only fair to face a consequence like this. In fact, another reason why I was trying to refrain from visiting a restaurant was because I knew that my description was potentially already out there, and now I could get caught very easily. A few hours of walking later, I suddenly felt dizzy like never before. Then, I had another blackout. I woke up in the middle of the night and was feeling so damn disoriented from everything my body was going through. I stayed on the ground for a few minutes, thinking. I almost had the desire to turn myself in since, like I said, I was kind of worried about going to any stores because of how my description might be out there. I checked my phone and discovered that it was a few minutes past midnight. Then I suddenly felt really pissed at myself for not even thinking about getting new clothes. I stood up right away and sprinted toward a laundromat I could see in a small pool of light from a street lamp. I was pissed to the highest degree, so to let my rage out, I decided to pick up a metal folding chair I saw on the sidewalk and was about to break the damn window. I struck the window with it like a crowbar and put my arm over my eyes to keep the glass that was flying everywhere from getting in. I saw no cars passing by, so I didn't think anyone saw what I just did. I jumped in through the broken window and swiped a pair of jeans and a black sweater. I was so freaking cold that I wore the new sweater over the one I already had on and threw off my pants and changed into the new jeans. In a flurry of madness, I dashed out the door, leaving my old pants on the floor, and sprinted as fast as I could, my hands slicing the cold air. 15 minutes later, though, I stopped because I had to take a piss. I know this sounds pretty deranged, but since it would already be hard to find a bathroom, I just looked around for bushes. A few moments later, I decided to go behind a building so no one could see me, and I dropped my pants. Then, I took a leak in some bushes. After taking that piss, I continued running. I was feeling so crazy that all I had on my mind was avoiding the cops and my anxiety to reach Eugene's house. Half an hour later, I finally reached his neighborhood. I was having trouble thinking because all my hunger was driving me crazy, and I had a cold. Then, I suddenly remembered that I had packed a few Cliff Bars in my bag. I was famished, so I decided to drop my bag down and toss everything out to get to the Cliff Bars at the bottom. I tore off the wrapper of one of them and devoured that snack. I washed it down with the rest of the water I had. I was so hungry that it tasted heavenly. I almost forgot how much pleasure eating gives people. After that really light dinner, I put my stuff back in my bag, hid myself behind a few large trees, and just hit the sack. So tired that I didn't mind my legs sort of being submerged in the mud while I was laying down. In the morning, I was in the middle of a really good dream, but then a voice broke into it. At first, I thought it was a cop, so I started shouting and rolling around. The voice reassured, "Hey, it's me!" I recognized who that voice belonged to right away. Eugene. He asked me, "What are you doing sleeping in the mud?" I looked down at the lower part of my right leg, and I noticed that it had become a little bit brown with mud from coming into contact with that dirty puddle my leg was in. I told him, because I was tired as hell, so I guess I got kind of careless and decided to sleep on the dirty ground. Then he said in a playful way, "Well, that was probably relaxing as hell, you muddy pig." I kind of chuckled. Then he turned to face his brother, who was also outside the house, and said, "My brother Josh will of course be running away with us, too." His brother looked 9 or 10 years old. After that short discussion, I stood up and we started walking towards the road. Eugene and Josh were both wearing matching backpacks with the same logos. As we walked, I was of course famished like never before, and I had to prevent my hunger from driving me crazy by eating a little Cliff Bar every now and then. However, although those light snacks were better than nothing, my desire to eat was still killing me. In fact, something that was really annoying me was that every half an hour, we would have to stop walking just so I could take out my handkerchief and blow my nose due to my cold. Anyway, Eugene explained to us that he wanted us to walk to Santa Monica Pier because he has a cousin who lives in a beach house. And before we went on the run, he texted him and asked him if we could stay with him. He loved him, so he of course said yes. Luckily, Eugene's grandparents' house was very close to Santa Monica, so the GPS on our phones revealed that it would only take slightly over an hour to walk there. However, about an hour into our walk, as Eugene and I were chit-chatting away, Josh had suddenly stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, and the look on his face looked a lot like he was severely ill. He was also kind of leaning over like he was about to throw up. Eugene asked him, "Joshua, are you okay?" Then, all of a sudden, some nasty-looking puke came spewing out of his mouth, and then it landed on the sidewalk and started seeping into the cracks like a fountain. I asked Eugene, "Eugene, do you know what's wrong with him?" "Yes. Long story short, he has a diseased kidney, and he's been on the wait list for a kidney transplant forever. But the sad thing is, now that we're on the run, he can no longer get one." "How selfish of you!" I exclaimed. "Why would you run away from your family when your brother's disease could have been cured?" "Because I know it seems like I'm being selfish, but lucky for us, that cousin of mine is a kidney specialist, so running away might have actually sped up the process of his illness being cured." "Well, it's hard to believe that he's a kidney specialist considering the fact that I already know that he's only a young adult." "Well, look, Joel, I swear it's true. I wouldn't lie to a really good friend of mine." For the time being, I chose to believe him, but at the same time, I kind of didn't care if he was lying because I know this sounds selfish, but I felt like, since Joshua wasn't me, his illness was the least of our problems. However, let me tell you about some more gay feelings I have for Eugene. I think he's a really good person because he dresses so well, and I find his face so handsome and attractive as though he's a girl. Only that he's actually a boy, but I still crave some romance with him. In fact, his voice sounds so cool that just melts in my ears. He was a skinny white boy, and he was currently wearing this black jacket that looked like its design was supposed to imitate a leather jacket, and it was unzipped, and a shirt that represented a metal band was showing. He was also wearing purple sweatpants with black kicks. Anyway, after about 15 more minutes of walking, we decided to stop by Habit Burger for lunch. I of course told Eugene about my concern for visiting stores and restaurants, but in the end, we decided that we would have no choice but to stop by those places every now and then if we wanted to avoid becoming malnourished. After we entered the restaurant and went to the counter, all three of us ordered a charburger with cheese, with fries, and we also got 3 medium Cokes. The guy behind the counter gave us a buzzer, and then we spotted a table and had a seat. When we got seated, the first thing Eugene said was, "Hey Joel, do you want to hear a little joke?" "Sure," I said. "Why is diarrhea hereditary?" "Why?" "Because it runs in your genes." I took a second to process the joke, and silence fell. And then all three of us started laughing our asses off. I added, "It literally runs in your genes if you eat a shitload of Taco Bell and shit yourself." We both began to laugh a lot more after I said that. A few minutes later, our buzzer started blaring, and then we went up to the counter to get our food. We went back to the table and started indulging, and I almost felt elated to be eating a damn burger and fries after starving for several days in a row. In fact, although I was currently in a very shitty position, the caffeine from the Coke started making me pretty hyped and happy, as though I was drinking freaking alcohol. Besides, in between bites of our delicious feast, Eugene decided to start telling this pretty interesting story about something cool that happened in his life. He explained, "Guess what, Joel? I know you're gay, but here's something pretty cool that your homosexuality reminds me of. Before we went on the run, there was this girl I knew, but the sad thing is, I ended up with a lot of wasted time thanks to her." I asked him, "Oh, well, how did she waste your time?" Then Eugene started jumping into the rest of his story.